but like the starting playing field needs to be inclusivity. All students are general education students first.
Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. If you didn't know, Branching Minds provides a ton of great resources for implementing MTSS, like our newsletter and our upcoming live virtual mini summit in June. Check out our show notes for links to sign up for both. On this podcast, we've talked a lot about MTSS and special education before, and there are still, I know that there's lots of contention around the topic or misunderstandings for teachers. And so I am welcoming today on the podcast Britt Shurley, who is our Director of Professional Services here at Branching Minds. And Britt has been a teacher, a learning disability specialist, school administrator, district level administrator, and now she leads a team of phenomenal educators who go out and train people on MTSS implementation. And she is kind enough to give us a little bit of her time. So welcome to the podcast, Britt.
Oh, thank you so much. You were trying to invite me. I've been waiting for my seat in the podcast. I just listen to it every week, every time a new one drops, and I am so excited to be here to talk with you, Larissa, and to talk with all of our educators that listen in.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. I want to first just say we talk a lot about like special education and MTSS here at Branching Minds. And so I know that there's like this, we can't even probably begin to talk about all of it, but we know that like MTSS can help that referral process. And I know there's misunderstandings about MTSS leads to that referral process, but I would say understanding that there's teachers that kind of don't understand this, like that don't really get how this all goes together. So, how do you address that misunderstanding with teachers and staff? Like, how do you go about having that conversation and helping sort of clear up the contention? Because I think we can talk about, yes, there is a misunderstanding, but like, what can leaders do to help clear this up for people?
Boy. Okay,
Oh, I just threw
good,
you an
good,
easy one, just an easy one to start.
good. You're tossing me softballs at like 90 miles per hour right now. Okay, so I think let's just start out by saying the number one important thing for educators, for leaders to make sure that they use in their language is language of inclusivity. Like that is the thing that I have found to be the best inroad for communicating about MTSS and special education. They are interconnected. You can't have one without the other. There's a lot of conversations around these two topics, and we can talk for hours about that, and I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit more here, but like the starting playing field needs to be inclusivity. All students are general education students first, and all general education students under FAPE, free and appropriate public education, are guaranteed quality instruction, right? So we start at tier one. That's like our MTSS structure. And then legislation came out and says, like, hey, let's make sure that our students are also all entitled to tiered levels of support when they need it. That's what we call MTSS. So all students are entitled to that general education programming. Let's start there. So that language of like, it doesn't matter whether you're a special education student in Miss Smith's classroom or Mr. Johnson's classroom, they're all entitled to that same level of access to differentiated supports and tiered supports model. Our special education students are also just protected under something that's a little bit stronger than that as well. They get that under IDEA, that specially designed instruction. I guess the best way, like my favorite descriptor, if I can, Larissa, tell you, is when I was an ed leader, I didn't really understand it until I was a teacher and then I was a specialist and started understanding like, why is everyone so uncertain about this? And the general sentiment that I came to was, and I have to tell you, can I tell you a story about my son and his
Yes.
my son has had GI challenges since he was a little boy. So we have a GI doctor that he goes to. It's a specialist, right? And so he sees the GI regularly. The GI actually does all of his like medication management and everything like that because different medications interact with his GI challenges. We still have a regular pediatrician that he goes to for standard care. Like he gets his checkup with his regular pediatrician along with his GI annually. And if he has like throat or something's wrong, we just run to the pediatrician and that's where we get checked out for the strep throat. So we get a quick intervention, right? A quick prescription for strep throat, but then he still has his GI things going on. Now, if he has like tummy troubles, that's a different conversation. We got to figure out which doctor is the right doctor to go to. Like, should we call the GI first and just go straight to the GI to get that GI, like that tummy troubles handled? That's typically the easiest route. That is special education and MTSS. Your special educators are your GIs, right? They're the specialists. They provide this really specialized level of care. They still look at the whole picture, of course. All of those notes go back to his generalist pediatrician and all of the students' notes go back to their general education teacher or other teachers that they may have throughout the day. Whenever a student has a little bit of a challenge in some type of curriculum or skill area deficit, a general education teacher can provide interventions. If that skill challenge is related to something that the specially designed instruction or the special educator is handling, loop in the special educator and make it part of the student's special education plan. I think when we like kind of rationalize MTSS in that picture and we help our teachers speak the language of like, what's your role and responsibility and what are you providing to this student, we start to pull apart the differences and how they fit together, how MTSS and special education fit together. If that helps, maybe.
I think so, 'cause I think the struggle though is when you're thinking about a student that doesn't know they have GI issues, right? Like maybe they don't know that there's something else wrong and they need to see a specialist or and so you're going through the sort of normal tiered support. And maybe like what would you say to those teachers going, I knew there was something more severe going on that we've like wasted all this time that we could have been helping them out. What would you say in that kind of situation? Because I think sometimes that's the part, right? You get to those referral meeting and the teacher was like, "Well, I've been telling you guys they needed this support all along." Like, how do you address that kind of sentiment among educators?
Oh, another 90 mile per hour softball. Okay, let's unpack that because you said a bunch of things like all at once. I think there's a misunderstanding about um, how fast or how slow a student could potentially get special education support, right? Like it
Yeah.
is it is part of the law that you can't delay staffing of a student. But then there's also this part of best practice, like, well, if you're going to put a student through staffing in special education, MTSS is designed to help you create that base plan. How do you know what the problem is? So
Mm,
what if we went to a heart specialist when my son was having GI issues? Like we could have gotten it wrong if we didn't do all the testing and the trials and the elimination diet. I mean, we had to go through it to get to the end result. And then when we got to the end result, we had a diagnosis, we had a plan of care, like we had all the things. And so I think I think it's a couple things all at once. Do we want to delay? No. Is it a waste of time to do MTSS? No. How do you know what your plan is going to look like on the other end if you don't walk through those steps? So I think sometimes those two challenges that happen in education, I think they end up getting smushed together. Like,
mm.
nope, we can't move to the next step until you do X, Y, and Z. And that's where time wasting comes in, I think. So let's unpack that for a minute. So teacher has to raise their hand and say, I think my student has a problem in the classroom. That's the first time waster. Universal screeners in an MTSS are like the key factors to identifying students that need additional supports. If you're looking at universal screener data over a series of years and you're looking at quality instruction and you're starting to talk about a student, why are we waiting for the third grade teacher to raise their hand and say, this student has a problem.
Mm,
As school leadership, we need to get better about using that data up front and saying, these students are on the watch list and we're putting them through an intervention and we're going to monitor their progress because we want them to be successful, not because we want to staff them in special ed, right? Like because we want them to be successful. So we're always looking for success for our students in an MTSS. And the minute we start doing that and stop waiting for teachers to raise our hands, now we stop putting barriers in front of educators that start feeling like, but I already know he has a challenge. We all know the student is struggling because we've used universal screeners and we've equitably identified who are our students that need tier two support right away and who are our students that need tier three. We have a plan on our campus to support them and we're collecting that data.
mhm.
Now, I think the other like big thing is that's a time waster is and now teacher, you need to go do that all in your classroom. So like the number one reason, and I think we've like had this pendulum swinging situation happening. Like I know the student needs specialized support, so I would like you to staff them to get special education services. Why? Because when the student has special education services, they go to a different classroom. So now someone else is providing special education
Mm.
service. What the teacher's really asking for is, hey, principal, I can't do all this in my classroom all by myself. So that's the time. That's another thing like, oh, it's a waste of time. No, what we do need to do is figure out how to get those supports drilled into that classroom level. So instead of Miss Johnson and Miss Smith and all these teachers providing their own tier one, tier two, tier three in their classrooms going like wild, what is the school doing to assist in, okay, all the third grade students that need this support are getting it here. All the students that need this support are getting tier three support here, or a push in is happening so that the pressure isn't all on one teacher. MTSS, special education, all of them are collaborative by design. So that's a similarity between them. And you can't wait to have the collaboration until special education. And so those things I think get accidentally mixed up as
Mhm.
MTSS is a waste of time. I just want to get to staffing. And so I think we got to dig deeper into what those questions are.
That was a fantastic answer because I think that you're naming some of those issues that teachers have with the idea that like, "Oh, I have to do all this work so that the student can finally get the help they need," but it's actually like, it's not about the teacher sort of it's not the pressure on the teacher to make sure that they've done all that. It should be collaborative. And I think you're right because, often what a teacher is saying is, "I've done all the things I know how to do. I need extra help." Like, that's the
Yeah.
statement of, like, they need more than I can provide for them. And so when you make that the collaborative when it is a collaborative practice, then it's not all about that teacher. And so MTSS can really be the answer there before maybe they do need to see a specialist, but trying to figure out maybe there's not, right? And you're right. And I think you said something earlier that I thought was really important is that you didn't want to get it wrong. I think that idea that you don't want to maybe give a support too early to a student that maybe that's not what they needed in the long run. And you kind of jump to that conclusion. And that actually would be the waste of time, right? Like if you went to the cardiologist with your son, and you're searching for an answer, you could have wasted more time than if you had done all the things. Um, beforehand. And I think that that's part of why MTSS is works really well with special education is because when you get to that point of referral, you've done all the work that you need to do. And so you're not backtracking. You're more ready for that process if that's what it comes to. So I
All
that
of those things, Larissa, all of those things. Yeah, I have to add, when we say like we say special ed, like it's one thing. I mean, I'm from Florida. I think there's 9 disability categories. I mean, a student could have autism spectrum disorder, a language impairment, a specific learning disability. Let's talk about that is the most broad instance of a disability category, and it could be any. Like this isn't just like, well, it's dyslexia. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability. There's also hundreds more that exist. And so how they manifest in every student is unique. So it's not like you can say all SLD students need this, right?
Mm,
You have to go figure out. I mean, figuring these things out and understanding disability categories and working with a team to understand the root cause of behaviors or academic deficiencies or challenges is more than just saying, we think that student has a disability. And just big picture, let's talk about what we're saying about a kid, like for their life
Mm.
in the long run. So really make a good decision about that with your team.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked on the podcast before of the danger of that label that it could sometimes mean it impacts the life of that student more than we maybe consider in the moment. And I've sat in those IEP referral meetings that are kind of contentious because it's like we really want to get this right, and we carry the weight of this kind of decision with appropriate amount of care because we don't want to get it wrong. We want to make sure that we're providing the student with what they need at the level that they need it in, but not because it's just the easiest thing to do, right? I often think that maybe even I think this as a classroom teacher, I didn't completely understand all that went into, having a student receive special education services because that means a lot for their life. And so I just think that that's the part where, we want to be careful with saying MTSS is a waste of time. And it's like, no, it's actually making sure that we get the decision right. And I think that's just really important to help communicate to teachers as for leaders understanding that, which is hard because I feel like leaders have such a pressure to um, make it make sense for teachers. But it's like how you communicate it is really important to how it will function in real life. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so my last question really then is, um, when you're in this kind of situation, and there are frustrations and maybe emotions that go along with this, like what would you do as a leader if you're in this kind of meeting and those things are what would you say to your staff or to your teacher?
Oof. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was a disability specialist and at the district office in special ed and student services nearly my whole career. So, I was only at the table when it was contentious. We did facilitated IEP meetings. Those are the only type of meetings that I know. Um, I think I think just like broad statements like this is what you have to do or we're all here for the students can sometimes be really frustrating. And so I just recommend always having an advocate that's on everyone's team. They're on the school's team and they're on the students' team, always at the table. Like that was a role that I held, a facilitated IEP support specialist, right? At one point in my career. And what I was able to do was just ask this specific questions about this student. I mean, we were at an individualized student meeting talking about significant wraparound supports for a kid. And so when someone's frustrated about it, really just get to the direct root of the problem. Like, listen to those frustrations, understand, like, is is the student is there a behavior problem that is happening and the teacher doesn't understand why they have to do MTSS? Because it would make me really frustrated if someone was saying, just keep tallying the number of behaviors that they have. Like, what is the replacement? What's the fix for that? What is the specially designed instruction potentially going to look like? What does the support need to be? So, as a leader, you have to be really agile and able to provide your teachers with solutions and not just, I understand, and we all need to be in it for the student. Like, you got to kind of be a solution positioner at the table. And that is throwing out any ideas that are potentially possible. Is there a paraprofessional that can come in and give the student a break? Is there a way that the student could spend time here? How flexible is our schedule? And I know that that's really overwhelming to think about. So, that's my advice to leaders at the table when you're talking to teachers. But back it up one step forward, my advice to leaders before you get to the table is check your resources. Like, identify if you have the things that you need in place for tier two. Do you have quality interventions accessible to all of your teachers and students for tier two? If you don't, you're going to go to a table and teachers are going to be frustrated at individual student meetings. So, like, make sure you have a place for students or an option for students to receive a curriculum, whatever it is, make sure it's really solid and everyone knows about it. Then make sure that you have some like options in your pocket for what is a good quality tier three intervention. What's a good quality tier three intervention and support for students with reading challenges? What are a couple of good ones for students with math deficiencies? What are a couple of good ones for behavior, independent functioning? And pool your team of people and get those in your pocket. That way, when you go to the table, you have a couple of options to start from, and then you can kind of mold
Mhm.
things from there to fit the individual student. But without a back pocket of resources, I think I would have been lost at meetings because then you just say things like, take time for yourself and you just need a little bit of self care. Let's all be in it for the student. Or it starts at tier one. Don't ever say that. Let's get more specific with how we're
Mhm.
supporting each other as collaborative. It's
Yeah.
not on one person's shoulders to deliver.
And I think you kinda named that thing of, like, the teacher is frustrated because if there's not a clear answer of what will happen, you could walk away from that meeting feeling like, "Oh, now it's on me to provide this service or to," you know, the IEP maybe is designed so they receive services in this area, but there's still behavior issues. And like now it's on me to deal with that. And so I think that's when teachers feel a little lost and frustrated and like, oh, well, what's this MTSS for? We're not really, like there's lots of things
Yeah.
that could get thrown out for
Yeah, I
that.
used to get calls, at the district office, and they were mostly around, "Can I have a one-on-one paraprofessional for the student for the classroom?" Because that's when the teacher's, like, at the wit's end, right? Like, it's the end of the rope. I have no more to give in this classroom, so we need a one-on-one for this student. That is a very specialized service in educate very, very, very specialized service in education. And so, like, it got to the point where I had to figure out at the district level, and so now district leaders, talking to you here, at the district level, I had to establish, okay, if we were gonna do this, it can't be permanent, and it can't like, people can't only get this when a student is special education, because the reality is sometimes people do need, like, an extra body. It just can't be any body, though, it has to be a trained body, so it should definitely be a trained body, but we can't leave these bodies in place across our campuses, and so I would say, "Listen, what you're looking for, like, you think the student needs to be in special education 'cause you think they need this one-on-one attention, right? This continuous supervision. So let's put it in place and then start to wean it." And so we put the intervention, the human, in place and give the student the actual support. Why was the human there? Because the student needed to take a break every 5 minutes, and that's really hard for a teacher to do. But their latency or their, like, time to complete a request or before they would have an explosion was only 5 minutes. So we knew every 5 minutes they needed a break. Well, then stretch it 10 minutes, then go to 30. Now get the whole morning. And then guess what? Make sure we teach our teams and our teachers, reduce the need on individual human resources, pull those people out. And now we're not staffing for special education to fix a problem that was fixed by intervention. So
Mm,
you got to check, do you have strep throat or do you have GI challenges for your whole life that you need a gastroenterologist? Like, let's just, start with your prescriptions, start with identifying those supports, find humans when you can and how you need it, but make sure that they're not permanent fixes. Everyone should have an entrance and an exit plan. And then when the exit doesn't work, now we start to identify deeper rooted problems or challenges that maybe need something different.
this has been an amazing conversation. And I just appreciate your knowledge and your expertise around this. And so you might be like my phone a friend at different points of like, okay, we need to talk to Britt about this issue. I mean, that's a new button I'm gonna have for the podcast of phone a friend.
Okay. Okay, phone a friend, that's my favorite button. Please put me on speed dial for, like, universal design, all things trying not to upstate teachers in the classroom. No, just I hope the message that I shared today is that, uh, do they fit together? Do they go apart? Not it's there's a lot to unpack when we talk about
Mhm.
MTSS and special education, but the reality is it's about collaboration and it is all worthwhile. We just have to answer the right questions and not just
Mhm.
the one that's at the surface level, I think, with our students and with our teachers and leaders
Yeah.
and all of the above.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for being here and we'll have you back on.
Thank you for having me. Feel famous now that I've been on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.